Hello, friends. Today, as I record this, it is the first day of Shivaratri. Shivaratri, in the tradition of the ancients, the ancient Hindus and Vedantis, literally translates to Shiva's night and refers to the 14th day of the dark fortnight, waning phase of the moon in each lunar month of the Hindu calendar. There are 12 Shivaratris in a year, but the most important one is Mahashivaratri, which falls in the month of Falguna, February to March. And so that's today. Here's a breakdown of the significance of Shivaratri. Celebration of Shiva. It's a night dedicated to Lord Shiva, and the spiritual significance usually is overcoming darkness. And many devotees observe a fast, stay up all night in prayer and meditation. And the night is symbolic of overcoming darkness and ignorance, both literally and metaphorically. There are different stories associated with Mahashivaratri, including the wedding of Shiva and Shakti, and Shiva's Tandava dance, the dance of Mahapralaya, the dissolution of the universe. Okay, so with that, I want to share with you some insights into fundamental reality. So frequently, pure consciousness is also referred to Shiva or Purusha, which is unfathomable, spaceless, timeless, and irreducible and without cause, and all the things I've mentioned in the past. But today I want to share with you also some of its understanding in modern terminology. Okay, so the first practice today that I want to share with you is understanding the significance of space. Okay, the space around you right now is physical space, and it is called Bhutakash. When you close your eyes and imagine, let's say you imagine listening to your song, a favorite song, imagine snow-clad mountains, rainbows, and anything in imagination and feeling and thought. That is the second space. It's mental space. The first was physical space, Bhutakash, this space. And then the second is mental space. In fact, it is mental space that projects as the experience of physical space. And then there's a third space, and that actually is incomprehensible and unimaginable. And it is referred to as the infinite, incomprehensible, fundamental source of all the other spaces that we can think of or imagine or perceive. And that space is called Chidakash, infinite space. That's the source of mental space and physical space. But physical space is also a window, a corridor to the infinite space. So if you're aware of space around you and you actually put your attention on space around you, your mind will go silent. But of course, the space is imbued with objects. You see, without the objects cannot exist without space, and space, as we perceive it, physical space, cannot exist without objects. In mental space, also there are objects, whether they are, they're all imaginary objects, but also thoughts, feelings, emotions. The ego identity is object. It's not you. So in both the physical space, Bhutakash, and in mental space, there are objects. But now let's say you took away all the objects, then even space would disappear And what would be left is spaceless, timeless, irreducible, fundamental Mahadakash, the source of all existence. And so let me share with you some words that are used to describe that in Sanskrit and in English. Anadi, no beginning. Ananta, infinite. Achintya, inconceivable. Akshara, not subject to decay. Ajara, no aging, eternal. Amara, immortal. Amurta, formless. Adrishya, invisible. Atindriya, beyond the senses. The senses create the experience of objects, etc. Aprameya, immeasurable. Avinashi, indestructible. Avyakta, unmanifest. Ajata, never born. Avikara, without flaws. Avyaya, imperishable, and Ashisha, perfect and complete and infinite and source of all experience, the self of the individual and also the self of the universe. And now I'm going to read to you from a book that I recently acquired, gifted by a friend. It says Buddhahood Without Meditation, and it talks about space. So let me read to you from a page on this book. On another occasion, Rigdzin Duddal Dorje said to me, Vajra, the eternal Vajra, for the actual meaning, look to space itself. In revealing the meaning of this, he stated the following: this empty space is the ground for the arising of the entire universe. So physical space engulfs the entire visible universe, 2 trillion galaxies, 706 trillion stars, uncountable trillions of planets. So, for example, that says this empty space is the ground for the arising of the entire universe. For example, it is like a mirror being the ground for the arising of a reflection, which has never existed as anything other than the mirror. It is like water being the ground for the arising of the moon's image, which has never existed as anything other than water on the lake. And it is like the sky being the ground for the arising of a rainbow, which has never existed as anything other than the sky. The space is modifying itself into, modifications of itself as all rainbows and moon and sun and sky and the universe. This space, since it cannot be injured, is invulnerable. Since space cannot be conquered or destroyed, it is indestructible. Since space abides as the basis for the unfolding of the world of appearances and possibilities, it is authentic. Since space cannot be altered by flaws or positive qualities, it is incorruptible. Since space is free of transition or change, it is stable. Since space completely permeates even the tiniest subatomic particle, it is in all ways unobstructed. And since nothing whatsoever can damage it, space is in all ways invincible. Since all material substances can be damaged by weapons, they are vulnerable. Since they can be conquered or destroyed under certain conditions, they are subject to destruction. Since they can change into one thing or many, they are false. Since they can be altered by something else, they are corruptible. Since they involve movement and vacillation and have no permanent location, they are unstable. They are in every way obstructed. Since they can be reduced to nothingness under other conditions, they can be vanquished. Things characterized thus as having never truly existed are empty. In addition, coarse things can be reduced to fine powder, to molecules and atoms. These molecules and atoms can be reduced to particles, and ultimately everything can be reduced to emptiness, because their characteristics as such have never really existed. If you think that these things originally existed but were reduced to non existence by having gone through this process, just look at dream images, which, even as they manifest, have never existed, and determine whether or not these images can be seen or felt. Also, observe the way that sensory appearances arise or cease merely due to whether your eyes are open or closed, or whether your foot is lowered or raised in walking. So, space is the window. The physical space, Bhutakash, look around you. This is the window. Close your eyes. Observe thoughts, feelings, emotions, images. That's also the second space, which is Chitakash. And then close your eyes and become nothing. And that nothing is the source of everything. So happy Shivaratri.